Welcome again to a new episode of the KewCast. I'm John, joined again for the third time by Clayton Cooley. Welcome, Clayton.
Thank you for having me.
Eddie is out this week, so thankfully you're available to sit in. Always fun to sit across from you because among the people in the Colorado area, I think you're one of the biggest paddle nerds.
Oh, I think you're right.
You know stuff that even I'm like, what? I didn't hear about this. You're caught up on all the latest gossip.
I think they call it habitually online.
Okay, I like it. But we do have a pretty packed show today. There's another one of these where I woke up this morning and I'm like, do I really have a lot of stuff going on? I sent you some notes late last night, so thank you for bearing with me. But we're going to talk about something I haven't heard anybody else talk about, which is JOOLA filed a patent extension on their existing 2 patents, which were awarded, which is going to be probably pretty big news. So we'll save the details for that next. We're also going to talk about a study based on some kind of meta-analysis of pro play. This study was put out by Pickleball.bz, Guns or Touch, and they're looking, like I said, at kind of a meta-analysis of thousands of points from pro play and kind of coming up with some kind of generalizations about what actually is the best type of shot to hit and how do most points end and that sort of thing. Next in line, we've got Paddles of the Week. We're going to talk about the Engage X2 Pro today, as well as a new company I'd never heard of and probably new to most of you, Mission First, their FireFight Pro. It's a firefighter-owned company. It's pretty cool. And after that, we're going to get into Tales from the Ball Cannon. I want to update everybody on some of the accelerated wear that I've been doing on paddles to test the spin durability. So we have the PAKLE Fuse to talk about today. We've got the Spartus Spitfire and the Ronbus Tenon. We have results on all of those to see which tier they slot in terms of the durability.
Awesome.
Yeah. Tales from the Ball Cannon. After that, we're going to take a look at, are USAP and UPA-A actually aligned with their direct spin testing? We know that the number's the same, 2100 RPM. We know that the paddle angle's the same. That don't know much beyond that, so we're going to dive into that a little bit. And a whole bunch of Q&A. I pulled in a bunch this week. Clayton, let's jump in. I sent you a PDF of the latest JOOLA patent extension. I'll just give a brief rundown, and I'd love to get your ideas on this too. So we've all heard the news over the past several months that JOOLA is filing a lawsuit against 11 defendants, 11 other paddle companies, and claiming that they infringed on some existing patents that were awarded, which was basically their Propulsion Core. We know the Propulsion Core is the kind of that horseshoe shape of EVA foam surrounding a center core. In their case, it's honeycomb polypropylene. So a whole bunch of companies were listed as defendants. A few of them have already can resolve the issue and agreed to pay royalties and then sell out of their paddles and not build these paddles anymore. That is ProXR and PaddleTech, basically the same company, and most recently Volair. But as far as I know, all the other companies on the list are planning to fight these claims. So what recently happened, and you can go find this, I'll put a link, it's a public document, but JOOLA filed a patent extension going for not just the horseshoe shape, but the full foam ring. So let's kind of give a rundown of where everything stands up to this point. So the original patent was patent A26 for short, which was basically patenting the horseshoe foam. So we can see there's a core, a center core, and then a layer of EVA between that core and the outer edge. And that EVA is shaped like a horseshoe. It's not a fully floating core. And then the second patent was the 891 patent, which was filed shortly after that 826. And that's basically that cheek foam they're putting into the Pro 4 and beyond that, now the Pro 5. And the cheek foam meaning like the foam inserts down in the neck of the paddle. And now this A1 continuation is the full foam ring. So the dates in which it was filed are going to be important because if this is awarded, it's backdated to the original. Now, the 826 patent, the application was filed November 13th, 2023. That was awarded together with the 891 patent. So again, that's the 826 horseshoe, 891 cheek foam. Once they're awarded, they stretch all the way back to the application. So both of those were applied for on November 13th, 2023. Now this continuation, the A1 continuation, this was very recently submitted, so February 25th of this year, 2026. But if it is awarded eventually, it's not yet, but if it is awarded, that backdates it to the original application of the original package all the way back to 2023. All right. So the most important things in these documents and the patent documents are the claims, and in particular the independent claims. So independent claim 1 for all 3 of these. I'll go one by one. A26, which was the horseshoe foam. The independent claim 1 is a paddle with opposing faces, a core in the middle with a recessed boundary. So it is separated from the edge. It doesn't go edge to edge, the core. And then there are 2 gaps, a peripheral gap 1 filled with something. It doesn't even matter what it's filled with. It could be foam, could be air. And then a hollow frame surrounding that first gap, which is on the outer edge. Now, what in the world are they meaning by gap and then hollow frame? So the gap is basically where the EVA foam goes, the horseshoe in the original patent. And the frame outside of that, the gap outside of that, is what we colloquially call the sushi roll foam, which is carbon fiber tube filled with expanding edge foam. Mm-hmm. Okay. Clear as mud. Now, the second patent was all of that plus the cheek foam. And now this A1 continuation, the independent claim 1 is all of the things, so paddle with opposing faces, and this core with the same sequence of stuff, right? You have a core separated from the edges with 2 gaps filled with different materials. The floating core part of it is that first gap, so what the EVA foam is now surrounding entirely the central core. Now, independent claim 17, I'll go through each one of these. There's no independent claim 17 on the first 2, but what they're really focusing on the A1 continuation is a real kind of frame-first architecture. So they're looking at that hollow frame, then an inward spaced core, and then the surrounding gap with the first filler in the gap and the second filler in the frame. So that was part of the original 2 as well, but they're really like pointing to this. I don't know exactly why it's so important for this last one to really clarify this, but it is listed now as an independent claim. Also, there's an independent claim 20 on the last one, which is basically a narrow embodiment requiring greater than or equal to 5 millimeters surrounding the foam gap around the core, throat extension, and an expandable filler inside the frame. So again, this is kind of like their legal team came up with this to probably support their cause. And I'm not sure exactly why it's more likely to get awarded with these kind of narrow specifications. Nevertheless. So Clayton, I've been just gabbing all day here. What are your thoughts on these? And is there something that you heard me say that wasn't quite clear or left out that you can kind of clarify on?
Yeah, no, I think it's hard to say. You know, it's interesting reach for them, in my opinion. I know. I think the one that always helps me think about that second patent with the cheek foam is that the sushi roll actually needs to go inside of the cheek foam. I think that's a big clarification there. I think there's a way to get around that. But yeah, it seems like they're like things are going great with suing. Why not just add this little continuation? Maybe get it in front of the right judge. I mean, maybe you argue we already surrounded 3/4 of the core with foam. Is it really innovative to just make it a circle? But my other question to you would be, let's just jump the gun and say this got granted. Do you still need that sushi roll, around? So the way to get around that patent is just to have the floating foam go to the edge, sort of like we've seen with the Power series from 11.624, and then same with the Honolulu series. So you don't have that sushi roll. Yeah. And then are you still okay there?
Yeah. I've actually got some dissected paddles here, and we'll do some show and tell in a minute. But yeah, I think you're getting to the heart of the argument, and that is, I think we can all agree that JOOLA has every right to kind of protect their genuine innovations, and every company should be able to defend legitimate intellectual property. And the patent system also protects the public by preventing patents from covering ideas that were already known, prior art, for example, or would have been obvious development. So that's the 2 opposing things here. Like, yes, you have the right to protect IP, but is it an overreach for JOOLA to now go for fully floating cores? I mean,
something they've never done.
They've never done, and almost every other paddle company has, right? We can name a whole list of paddles that are fully floating. That's not necessary. You don't have to go to market with an IP for it to be covered with a patent.
Right.
But you could argue not a good look for JOOLA. Clearly what's been going on is the companies that have agreed to their terms in the lawsuit are going to sell out of their paddles and pay royalties to JOOLA for those. And then to get around it, they're going full floating core. Right. Now, I'm sure that those companies that have already settled are now like, well, crap, I settled for this, and I've come up with a new design, and if this gets awarded by JOOLA, we're in trouble. So let's do some show and tell. Okay. So, I mean, yeah, YOLA could argue, yes, YOLA has the right to protect their IP. YOLA could argue, like you said, that the reason why they're doing this full thumb extension is because maybe it's just an obvious iteration of their existing patents, and I'm sure that's what they're arguing. Like, yeah, we have ours configured so that it's just in the shape of a horseshoe and it's a peninsula shape, and our core goes into their handle. But how innovative is it to actually just encircle the entire core? It's just an iterative improvement.
Right.
Well, if we were to go that route, then let's take a look and how innovative is the actual original propulsion core. So let's go back to Gen 2. This is the bread and butter filth. And it was, years before the YOLA patent, and every paddle company was doing this, the thermoforming, 6.0 was doing it, every paddle. And Onyx actually has kind of a patent on this, and we'll get back to that later. So this is the central honeycomb polypropylene core. And in the YOLA patent, it doesn't matter the material in the core. It could be full foam, it could be whatever. And this is the expanding edge foam. And it is encapsulated in a sushi roll style unidirectional carbon fiber tube. And it's basically a filler. And the people have been using this for a good while now. And this is Gen 2 construction. So center core separated from the outer edge of the paddle and filled with one type of material, one channel. This is what they're calling the frame in the YOLA patent. Now, how different is this from the propulsion core? This is the propulsion core. It is exactly the same. Honeycomb center, the sushi roll exterior, so that frame with expanding edge foam, and they separated it on part of the paddle and then added a strip of EVA foam. So using the same logic that, is it really innovation, or is it just an iteration to go from a horseshoe-shaped foam to a fully floating core? You could actually argue, is it really innovation to go from Gen 2 honeycomb thermoform paddle to a Gen 3 paddle with just an extra strip of foam in between the core? And I don't know. Is it really innovation, or is it iteration? So they're very similar, right? So I just wanted to put that out there and then look for, what are people doing and what does the patent actually cover? So this is the Selkirk SLK era, and it is a fully floating core, meaning that the honeycomb is separated from the edge all the way around it. The honeycomb doesn't go into the neck. You can see this very bottom portion. There's an EVA band separating it. And what the YOLA patent requires is not just one channel, but two channels, right? So you have an EVA or whatever just outside the core, and then another channel filled with that sushi roll, what they're calling the frame. So you need that sequence 1, 2, 3 of different things from the core going out. But where it gets tricky is that most of these floating cores actually have in the handle the expanding edge foam, the sushi roll, and in some cases it goes up into the neck. And technically, you could actually argue that this violates that patent if the patent is awarded, because it has that sequence of core, channel 1 filled with the EVA, channel 2 filled with the expanding edge foam from interior to exterior. And just on that, half an inch portion.
Yeah. Basically what got the shift.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The shift has like a 2-inch portion in the neck where you had that sequence, right? And it's not fully floating, so the core goes into the handle, and that's where they're able to get it on the first two patents. But now, just because the core is fully floated and it doesn't have edge foam outside the EVA, like the Selkirk SLK era, like the 11624 Power 1 series, well, you got to look close at the handle because sometimes you have that sequence of stuff. And again, it's just like, this isn't fundamentally changing the performance of the paddle. It's just like, it's the way they're made in China. Like, that's what they do to fill the stuff in China, and it's a little bit odd to me that we're debating. And I know that patent attorneys need to cross their T's and dot their I's to make sure that they're protecting IP, and I totally support that. But it's these little changes in the end, which may lean one way or the other in terms of violating patents, don't mean anything in terms of performance. This little sequence in the neck could be there, could not.
Right.
Nobody'd ever know. Okay, another paddle that's very popular, the J2NF. This is the titanium version. So this is the notch foam, and this is not a fully. I forgot this wasn't fully floating, but this is central EPP and then we have the notched EVA foam. But you wouldn't be violating the patent if you just looked at it from here, because there's no two channels. It's just one channel of EVA outside of the central core. But down here at the neck, we have the same sequence. We have center core, we have band 1 EVA, and band 2 expanding edge foam. So technically, yes, this could be.
I think he just gave JOOLA another company to go after.
Please don't. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of give a rundown and show that, the propulsion core is not that much different than thermoforming. Now, prior art covers anything coming before this, so technically, this is kind of prior art, but they're specific enough with their patents that thermoforming alone wouldn't cause. Mm-hmm. But Gearbox has been doing this stuff with EVA and multiple bands for years now. Mm-hmm. So we've got some real potentials for prior art. So I'll show some x-rays. I don't have a dissected Pro Power, but I do have the dissected. So here we have a central core separated by the outer edge of the paddle by 2 channels. First one is EVA, and the second one is the sushi roll. So it is exactly what JOOLA is claiming in the patent, which I would argue is prior art. Now, I know that they did reference. Oh, by the way, this is the GX2. This came later. I'll show an X-ray of the Pro Power, which has the exact same layout. Right? You have core separated with 2 channels.
Edgeless.
Yeah, and just wanted to show that absolutely there's some evidence for prior art. And like I said, Gearbox, and in particular the Pro Power elongated, was referenced and as in the original application, so they knew of it, and the investigator actually brought it in somehow. But regardless, I would argue
they said we're not going for full foam. No, not full floating.
Right.
We don't care about that.
Yeah, maybe. But now that they are going for full floating, I feel like it broadens it enough where you can kind of argue.
100%.
You have a stronger argument against the patents. All right, so we've also got the Gearbox GX5, and I have an X-ray in here of the GX5. I bought this, and basically this goes all the way back to 2021. That's when the GX5 Power Series. Basically, if you look at the Gearbox lineup, any core that has the power in the title has an EVA band around it. So what this has is a central core and then a EVA band fully floating it. So this is one of the earliest fully floated cores. Now it doesn't have the 2-step sequence though, where you had the core,
right? That's the
one
big
channel,
thing.
and then another channel. But some of the Gearbox Power Series that were years predating the JOOLA patent, I've heard at least, I don't know for sure, have that 2-channel system with both edge foam and the EVA band. So I think there's a lot of people are digging around in eBay and used paddle catalogs to see if they can find.
The price just went up on eBay.
Some of these. So that one, 2023 was the Pro Power. 2021 was the GX5 series. Mm-hmm. And there's one goes all the way back to we know that it goes back to at least to 2021 for Gearbox. So they've been doing this for years, and maybe there's subtle differences, but regardless, this was in the paddle ecosphere. Only Gearbox was doing it, but factories in China were filling things with edge foam and adding some EVA foam here and there. Right. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, JOOLA chose to keep the patent broad. They didn't specify a honeycomb core. So I think, between that and not specifying what the fillers are or anything like that, I mean, looking at the PPE and the Gearbox paddles, I think definitely that's prior art that's valid.
Yeah. We'll see where the courts go with it. But, the key question is, did JOOLA invent something totally new here? Was it fundamentally new, or did they combine existing technologies that were well known in a way that might ultimately be viewed as an obvious engineering evolution, right? And this is exactly the type of question that patent law and patent lawyers ask, in terms of what they consider to be novel or obvious. So this is all part of the game, and the propulsion core in context, I'd say that the design combined, several sort of technologies already in the industry, right? Very similar to the thermoform paddles that came before that. The same materials, and then they added one thing, which was a strip of EVA foam separating the sushi roll from the interior core. And, the legal question is whether that combination was sufficiently inventive, So the reason why I'm kind of getting into the weeds with this more than I did with the original JOOLA patents is that prior art is the public good, Yeah. And, I wouldn't want to see the industry go in certain ways that it doesn't need to go if somebody didn't speak out and
Yeah.
and talk about the prior art, you know?
Yeah, and you're talking about going from something that covered maybe 10% of new paddles versus over 50% of, releases we're seeing. Everything is full floating foam these days.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, let's come up with a list of basically every paddle you see that is popular right now is some variant of a fully floating core.
Absolutely.
Right. And every company's doing it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll add one interesting thing I heard as far as responses on the lawsuits coming from the companies fighting. I think by July 22nd, they'll have their responses. So
oh, really? Okay.
That's a date to be on the lookout for.
July 22nd. All right.
Yeah, coming up.
Coming up soon.
Get your popcorn.
All right. So closing thoughts, I definitely support companies protecting real innovation. I mean, who wouldn't? I also support, a patent system that's fair and leaves room for healthy competition, as well as, incremental engineering improvements, not being targeted by a company and wiping out all competition. Mm-hmm. Clearly, this is not anti-competition. It's protecting IP. So this case will help define, where that line is drawn. So absolutely, keep your eyes on it. All right, let's jump into the second round of the latest news and gear gossip. This is probably the longest section of latest news we've had on a podcast yet. So again, this pickleball.bz article called Guns or Touch. And it's basically a metadata analysis of every point won in 2025 to 2026 in professional pickleball games and doubles pickleball. So again, this is a newish website that gets real technical, so you might be interested in seeing some of their other articles, so go check them out. And this article in particular asks a question we've all debated. So is modern pro pickleball won with power or finesse? So overall, I thought they did a nice job. What are your thoughts of the article?
Yeah, I think it was well written, well laid out. I think it brought up some interesting points. It's always nice to crunch the data and see what it tells you versus what we kind of all think just from watching.
Yeah. So I did cite real research, including that big study. I'd actually never seen that before. There were a few things I disagree with, which I'll get into here, but I think there's some really quite a few interesting takeaways. So number one is most points aren't won with winners. So probably the biggest takeaway here is that professional doubles is still largely an error management game. Analyzing 7,000 shots from professional men's doubles found that only 28% of points ended with a clean winner. 35% of those points were ended with unforced errors, and 37% were forced errors. So the vast majority of points are ended with errors at some point. I think it's important. It's an important reminder. I think anybody who's keenly watching pro pickleball understands this intuitively. You see the best players in the world, particularly Ben Johns. He's classic of just being patient and waiting for the other team to screw up, And he can do that because he trusts his soft game more than anybody else in the world. He knows he can just grind somebody to death,
Yeah.
But I think we see the highlight reels and we get the impression that most of the points are ended with something pretty spectacular, right? So that's what we try to emulate at the amateur ranks. And you see the people who are actually improving the most are the ones who are working on their valleys rather than their peaks, bringing up their floor and working on the resets and just making balls, you know what I mean? So I thought that was a fun little analysis. Another takeaway point here is that the third shot debate isn't as simple as always drop, right? So another interesting section looked at over 22,000 track shots from professional doubles. Did you track down that link of how they got the data?
Oh, you're talking about for the research article?
Yeah. I did. The source is two students at the University of Michigan using a really large data set. Their webpage is called How Do I Win a Pickleball Point? Caleb and Maxwell. And at the time of their analysis, they extracted 50 professional doubles matches, which included 2,500 plus rallies and 22,000 individual shots. Wow. Now, I thought this is like AI stuff, like they sicked AI on it, but no, it was volunteers watching a match video and then manually entering every shot into a central database. It's a lot of work. So here's, you have the chart on here too, the shot menu of a pro doubles rally. So dinks, a lot. Like on a scale of 1 to 100, they're at 100. In descending order, we have serves, returns, third shot drop, third shot drive, speed ups, then lobs, a score of 3 for Ernie's, score of 2 for third shot lobs, and a score of 1 for ATP in terms of the relative frequency of rallies. So the researchers found that third shot drives were associated with a higher proportion of wins, right? So you're more likely to win the point if you're driving rather than dropping on your third shot. Did you pick up on the nuances on that?
Yeah, I think they said that, you've got to correct it though, right? Because typically if you're driving a shot, it's a weaker return.
Yeah.
That's a more drivable ball versus I think you're more likely to drop off of, a harder return or.
Exactly.
So you got to do a little correction there, but yeah.
Yeah. You typically drive when you get a weaker return that's shorter, et cetera. So you're getting set up to win the point with a weak return. It's not so much your choice of shot, driving versus dropping.
Yeah.
It's the weak return that kind of sets the stage for that. So I did appreciate this nuance because it really is easy to confuse correlation with causation, right? You look at that correlation, you're like, I need to start driving all my thirds. And no, it's not going to work if you don't drive the right thirds, you know what I mean? I think I picked up on a big caveat. I couldn't find the date in which these matches were played,
right?
And the people actually observed and recorded them. I did kind of dig into the data a little bit, and there were the timestamps on some of the raw data have a 2022 timestamp, and that's when it was entered. So you can imagine that the pro game from 2022 is much different than it is, here in 2026. And I imagine that dink bar on the bar chart here would be much lower, and the drives and returns would be much higher. So interesting things there. And then, all right, here's where my main complaint with the article is the talk about spin, and the spin discussion in general gets a little bit oversimplified. So that when they get to the science of the spin section, they argue that the paddle's firepower may actually matter more than the surface friction. So the quote from the article, a paddle's ability to generate ball speed matters more to spin production than its surface texture does. Hello. Now, where did they get that? Well, it comes from an article at Pickleball Science suggesting that paddle ball contact time is the key element in determining the spin capacity of a paddle, even over friction of the paddle surface alone. Well, my high-speed camera suggests otherwise. Basically, all paddles fall within a very narrow range of dwell time, right around 2 milliseconds. So the ball is basically on the paddle almost a negligible amount of time, and the length of time it stays on the paddle, as far as I can tell, doesn't correlate with anything but firepower, and not in the way you think it would be, but the lower power paddles, the ball actually stays on a little longer. The higher power paddles, it tries to get the ball off. But we're talking 0.1 of a millisecond, right? So no significant difference between this. Okay. So another thing I would argue against here in terms of like prioritizing dwell time over the friction of the paddle is one of the softest paddles you can actually press your fingers into is the diadem vise, which is a full EVA paddle. It's not legal because it's so powerful. And according to this theory where more powerful paddles, you get more dwell, and it spins more, then the diadem vise should be one of the spinniest paddles on the market. And it is not. It's one of the least spinniest paddles on the market. And I actually filmed it with my high-speed camera and figured out why. The surface is so slick and there's not enough friction on the surface to grab the ball, and the ball slides across the paddle. It's slid a good 2 inches on that diadem vise, and it gets about half the spin as a normal like raw carbon fiber paddle does. So, I've read that Pickleball Science article. I would argue the other way. I think we have more data now. And I love a lot of the articles on Pickleball Science, but I think that one is I would argue against it. All right. I think the point taken that swing mechanics does play a role in spin generation. I'm not capturing everything I can about spin generation by clamping a paddle stationary and shooting with a ball cannon. Yes, it's telling us about the surface texture and elements of the physics of the paddle, but it's not showing us what an actual Kwang Dong can do on the court with his swing path. You know what I mean? So that's important, and we're not anywhere close to realizing its importance yet. All right. Any takeaways from you, Clayton?
Yeah, actually, one of the biggest takeaways I had was in the abstract of one of the articles they cited, and it was that I think they studied maybe 8 matches in 2025, but it was 60-something% of points in the first 3 to 9 seconds. So if you're looking for something to drill those first 5 shots over and over.
Yeah, especially.
Very important.
And that's pro level?
That's pro level.
So amateurs quarter that, right?
Yep.
first few seconds is a serve, return, third shot.
Yeah.
Serve, return if you have to prioritize, right?
Yeah, I think the coaching is coming out with that now. I'm starting to see more and more, YouTube videos saying if you're 3-0, don't practice your dinking, practice these things. And there's some truth there, for
100%.
sure.
How many dinks do you see at a 3-0 game?
At the 4-0 game, at the 4-5 game, you've got to get up there till you start to really see the grinding on the dinks.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Clayton, let's move on to paddles of the week. All right, the first one here is the Engage X2 Pro. So they came out with the X2, which is their first Gen 4 paddle. Now the X2 Pro promises more durable grit and a little bit more firepower. This is not out yet. This is launching at the end of July. It'll be $260 before code. And it is also Gen 4. We can see an X-ray here. Floating core. Uh-oh. But yeah, I don't know where they get the 4 types. I can't quite see it in the X-ray, but definitely there's what looks like an EVA band around a central core. I can't tell from the X-ray. The core looks like it's beaded, so I'm guessing EPP in the center.
Mm-hmm. And is that fiberglass patch?
That's my guess. There's 2.
Is that the extra power?
Yeah, maybe that's the 5% extra power.
We'll have to see the X-ray side by side.
So if you look at the center of the paddle, there's 2 wider squares, and that's kind of a signature of a fiberglass patch. Fiberglass sometimes increases the firepower. It definitely changes the feel of the paddle. Mm-hmm. I would not have guessed, though, with this, that this had fiberglass in it at all. And it is UPA-A only certified, so they're able to boost the grit here. And it is gritty.
Yeah.
Gets quite a bit of spin. You and I both played with this yesterday. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think it had, a softer, denser feel, which is something I like. I think versus a soft hollow kind of throws me off. I can't quite trust it as much. Mm-hmm. But sneaky power for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, this goes back to our debate we had on the podcast last week, or just the topic we brought up, whether or not soft and dense can actually be high firepower. And this definitely falls in that soft and dense quadrant of the feel wheel. And like I said last week, I'm not a fan typically of that quadrant. I like the stiff and hollow quadrant, but man, this one hits really nice. It reminds me a bit of the Tenon. It's even softer and denser, I'd say, than the Ronbus Tenon, but it is a very gratifying feel when you hit it. Good sweet spot on this. I got no complaints on that, on the performance.
Rip spin, as you would say.
Oh, dude, the spin is crazy on this. And the firepower is decent, I'm verdict's still out on it. I don't have enough playtime with it, but I'd still probably put it in a power category. It's not an all-court paddle. It's close to all-court, but I'm guessing power. Time will tell. The grit is promised as durable. I did the controlled testing with the ball cannon just yesterday. I have not analyzed the results yet, but just feeling it, I feel a little bit of texture loss, but not much. And that's not necessarily good or bad. Texture, it's all about friction at the end of the day, right? And the texture can wear down, and it still rips good spin if there's friction there. So can't tell you yet, but so far I'm kind of hoping. It's got a hex grit look to it, and a feel to it. Kind of hoping that it actually is going to be a tier 1 or tier 2, but we'll see. Looking forward to it. Yeah. I imagine, I haven't done the spin test with my arm yet, but this thing has got to be elite tier.
Yeah, I believe so.
Over 2,300 on average, I would say. Anything else, Clayton, on the Engage?
Do we know price or release? Or
Yeah, the price is going to be $260 before code and launching at the end of July.
Lifetime warranty?
Yeah, they'll do their typical lifetime warranty, which
might finally be a paddle worth having a lifetime warranty on as well. You actually have the grit.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder if it covers the grit. Regardless, this paddle I'm most excited about from Engage. I'm more excited than any of their previous ever, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to hype it up too much, but I think if you like that dense and soft feel, all the other things fall into place here. It rips spin. If the spin is durable, that's going to be a big thing. And big sweet spot. Oh, one caveat here is you have to like a heavier paddle with more plow through. I tested the swing weight. I think stock it's like 125.
That's what the arm told me.
Yeah. So not a light paddle, but that also adds to some of the play characteristics. Play characteristics that I like so much, including the plow through and just kind of the nice, pleasant feel when you hit the ball. It doesn't feel like the ball is pushing the paddle around. It's the other way around. So Good twist weight on it too, 6.5, I think I recall. And this is purely stock. So you do have to like a heavier paddle, but well done. All right, the next paddle in the lineup is a new company, new to me anyway, Mission First. And they came out with what they're calling the FireFight Pro. This is a firefighter-owned company. I think it's pretty cool. Haven't seen that before. And the shape of it, you brought it up right away. You're like, that looks just like the Gherkin Draco. So very, very similar. And the Gherkin Draco I'm holding is of the hybrid shape. So you can see that the Gherkin Draco is just a hair taller.
Mm-hmm. Flatter top, flatter corners.
Yep. Half an edge guard higher than the Mission First. So it's not a direct copy of the mold. And the Mission First is, it's a little bit tapered. Okay. And it's just a hair wider at maximum width than the Gherkin Draco. So very similar look, and I'd say probably similar feel and play characteristics to the Draco.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's $150 after code. Pre-ordering, you can pre-order now. It's shipping in late August, so you'd have to wait a while.
Not approved yet.
Not approved yet. Big caveat here, not yet USAP approved. They're submitting that, so I would not recommend buying it if that's an issue for you until it actually does get that approval. Looking at the X-Ray, we can compare it side by side with the Draco. It is a full foam Gen 4 paddle. It is microcellular, so MPP in the center, presumably an EVA band around it. Did you
I think it says TPU band.
Oh, is it TPU?
Yep.
Thank you. I wonder what those little neck inserts are.
Yeah, TPE inserts.
Okay.
Is also
Yeah, thank you.
listed. Yep.
Yep. So TPU band around the outside, TPE cheek foam. But you can see it, a very similar look to other paddles, probably made in the same factory as several others, mainly the most popular paddles. You got the carbon fiber or fiberglass strips along the edge. Yep, reinforcements along the edge, which does boost twist weight and prevents the faces from caving in and that soft foam on the exterior. Let's talk about how it plays. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I thought it felt nice. You know, good shape, even without any weight. It was pretty forgiving. Not crazy power, but definitely if you got on it. Grit is good. Not durable grit, but you know they did a good job making the face gritty.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, good spin out of the box. It's traditional raw carbon fibers. You can expect tier 4 performance out of it. But yeah, I think the paddle played pretty well. I was impressed. I typically don't cover completely new brands unless there's something to talk about in the paddle, and I think this does warrant some discussion on the podcast, because I would put it up there in terms of performance with the Gherkin Dracos and others similar builds and the MPP family. So I think this is their first paddle. Could be wrong on that, but newish company, and they did well. Anything else, Clayton?
No, I think that covers it.
All right. Moving on to the next segment, Tales from the Ball Cannon. We're just going to we're going to do 2 segments here. First one's going to be pretty brief, just giving some spin durability updates for a few paddles. And if you are a reader of the newsletter, you already got the news about the PAKLE Fuse. Man, there was so much buildup around the PAKLE Fuse. And, I had high hopes for it also. I liked the way it played. We got to play with it. Before we talk about the results, let's talk about our play experience, because you had the kind of opposite experience. And I love that really deep, thonky, super hollow paddle feel that's kind of on the boundary of soft and stiff, which is exactly what a Fuse goes. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, not for me. Just I didn't jive with it. Felt like I was mishitting a lot. Didn't feel forgiving.
Okay.
But I think a lot of it went down to just the feedback I was getting in the handle and then the sound. I know that makes a big
You don't like
impression.
the super deep sound?
I don't know. I don't think I like the feel that goes along with it.
Yeah. Now, do you get the same feel with like the Les Inferno?
I haven't put too much time on it, but I would say similar. I feel like the Inferno is a little more dense. Feeling just a little bit.
Yeah. So not quite, definitely.
Of course, now when you say the Inferno, you could be referring to 6 different paddles. So.
The Frozen is
the dark, the Frozen.
Yeah, right. But it's interesting. I think we all have different tolerances to vibration frequencies and the nerve endings in our hands, and just like we have intolerances to food, there are certain frequencies that some people will pick up on and it drives them nuts, and that others don't recognize at all. And I'm not picking up on any kind of bad vibrations in this paddle. It feels great to me to hit. But yeah, there's a bunch of different types of foam in this also. I think they also have TPU or TPE in it. And that sometimes is a culprit for people that don't like the feel of the paddle because it does send different vibrations than does EVA and
yeah, I know Justin is notoriously not a fan of the TPE or TPU around the handle.
Maybe you guys just have more sensitive nerve endings in your hands.
We're just more sensitive.
All right, well, let's move on to the spin testing results. So the PAKLE Fuse, this is with the Canon. With my arm, it got 2,300-ish RPM. Actually, it's 2,100 something. It wasn't quite as spinny as I thought it would be, given the texture. It's very aggressive. RPM new with the ball cannon, 2,050. RPM post-wear, 1,470. So a loss of 580 RPM and a percentage loss of 28.3%, which puts it into Tier 4, along with raw carbon fiber paddles, right? So not the results that I think most people were hoping for. I think everybody wanted that to be a Tier 1 or Tier 2. Unfortunately, the paddle I got, not. And it sounds like some other people are experiencing some loss as well. Outside of the first batch that was released, which apparently was actually real durable. And the folks from PAKLE saw my newsletter, reached out to me and said, hey, we're going to try to fix this. Can we send you another paddle to test out? So obviously I will. They're going to try to get, batch 4 or whatever it's going to be more durable than Tier 4. I'll test it. But even if it does come in at like Tier 2, I think they're going to need to demonstrate that that's actually not just a fluke. Anomaly, a fluke, right. A one-off that needs to be consistently more durable. So, yeah, kind of a bummer. I think everybody was rooting for the Fuse. It's not there yet. Not saying it's a bad paddle. It's a $100 paddle, plays great, and it has raw carbon fiber. Not raw carbon. It has a grit that lasts as well as raw carbon fiber, which up to 6 months ago was the gold standard, right? Mm-hmm. So not bashing on this paddle. It's not exactly what they had hoped for, though. All right, let's move on to the Spartus Spitfire, another paddle that's generated a lot of buzz over the past few weeks for their new, what is it called? Nano Permagrit? Nano Grit? I think it's Nano Grit.
Nano
right?
Permagrit.
Okay, Nano
Permagrit Nano.
Permagrit Nano.
We got
right?
there.
So Spartus is now, famous. Their best paddle that they've put out has been the P1 and 3 different shapes now. And that Permagrit is actually some of the best and most durable grit on the market. Best meaning highest spinning and most durable. So it basically loses no spin in my durability testing. So they came out with a newer, cheaper paddle, the Spitfire. They're coming out. It's not launched yet. And it's also very hollow and thonky. I love the performance of it. And it has a new variant of that Permagrit called Permagrit Nano. Different feel, texture feel than the original Permagrit. I did test a prototype. That came in at Tier 3. Now, the production model, which I've tested, RPM new with the ball cannon, 2430.
Wow. With
my arm, it also got, on average, 2400. So massive, massive spin potential on these stock. RPM post-wear, 2072. So that's good. Over 2000 still. Spin loss of 358 RPM and spin loss percentage of 14.7. So again, that falls into Tier 3, which I think is great. Tier 3 ain't bad.
No.
It's better than
especially
raw carbon fiber.
When you start at 2400.
Yeah. You start at 2400 and you lose 350 RPM, you're still above 2000, which is still good. Yeah. So I think this puts it in a really good position as a budget paddle with Tier 3 durability spin that gets amazing spin to start with. So I think this is still going to be a very popular paddle.
Yeah, I think the viewers and I are all going to want you to take that same paddle and shoot it 100 more times. We want to know, does it stop at 2000 or keep going? I think it's worth investigating.
Yeah, for sure. Next up is the Ronbus Tenon. So I did the spin durability test on that. I did a prototype and a production model, and both came in at the Tier 3 mark. So the prototype started at 1669 RPM, ended at 1460. And again, just because it's below 2000 or below that 2400 mark, doesn't mean, we'll talk more about this in detail in a minute. The ball cannon is standardizing everything. But just because a paddle starts lower than another doesn't necessarily mean you can't generate good spin with that paddle. Right. So I was able to generate actually close to elite tier with my arm. I got almost 2300 on average with the Tenon. So it gets good spin to start with. That's a loss of 12.5% for the prototype and 16% for the production model, which places it right in the middle of tier 3. So again, good stuff. It's not a bad thing to be in tier 3. It's actually quite good. It's just that tier 2 and tier 1 are really hard to get into. Yeah. All right. Anything on top of that, Clayton, you want to talk about?
No, I think just in case, like for the viewers, I think it's fair to say the only thing that the Permagrit Nano and Permagrit have in common is that Spartus made both of them.
Yes.
And put Permagrit in the name.
Yeah.
Outside of that, there's no real shared, as far as I can tell, technology there.
Right. Yeah, Permagrit, the original Permagrit is if you look at it under a microscope, it's just a bunch of grit. There's no peel ply matrix the grit is sitting in or over, but the nano version of that is actually grit infused peel ply. So it looks like a basket weave under the microscope, and you see the grit particles embedded, which is what a lot of companies are doing. Honolulu, the 60, 11624. So it is a very different technology. All right. Tales from the Ball Cannon, part 2. Are USAP and UPA-A aligned with direct spin testing? And what actually does 2100 RPM mean? That's the limit now for both direct spin tests at USAP and UPA-A. So, assuming that USAP's new methodology is producing results in the same ballpark as UPA-A's, I do think that 2100 is a good limit. Now, people might be asking or thinking, wait, didn't you just say that you're able to get 2400 RPM on the high spinning paddles with your arm? Does that mean we're going to drop the limit on RPM? No, it does not mean that. What is happening is that this 2100 is within a specific set of conditions in a controlled setting. They're clamping a paddle. They're shooting it with a ball cannon. The ball speed that they're shooting it with is 40 miles per hour, and the paddle is clamped at 30 degrees. So my methodology is very similar. I also use a clamped paddle and a ball cannon, and the paddle is clamped at 30 degrees, but I'm shooting it at 60 miles per hour. And actually, that was the first podcast you sat in on when I was developing that methodology for the Canon spin testing. And I think you agreed at the time that the reason why I chose 60 miles an hour over 40 miles an hour is you get more spin that way. And it just starts plateauing it after 60 miles an hour because the ball kind of slips over the surface at higher speeds. And to get the maximum spin on the maximum spinniest paddles, I'm shooting at 60 miles an hour. And that's more reflective of what I'm getting with my arm. What they're doing, and that just gets lower RPM with the lower ball speeds. So at 40 miles an hour, you're getting less ball speed. And I actually did a study with my cannon, and I did 20 paddles, and I shot them at 60 miles an hour and 40 miles an hour, and it averaged those. And what I was seeing is, on average, the 60 miles an hour inbound ball gets about 360 RPM more than 40 miles an hour. So you can kind of do the math, and anytime you see a paddle passes USAP or UPA-A at 2,000 RPM, you can assume it's going to be in the 2,300s, close to 2,400 RPM at 60 miles an hour, right? So I do think it's a good ceiling because that's about where we see the spinniest paddles that aren't crazy like the Owl or the Diadem Hush. Some of the clearly illegal paddles, that's about where they're getting at that 2,100 RPM mark at a Canon inbound speed of 40 miles an hour, right? But going back to that assumption that things are going to be equal between USAP and UPA-A, that's still very much unproven. Like, we don't know exactly how USAP is clamping their paddle, right? That can make a difference, and a whole bunch of other variables. So until that SLP comes out and we know exactly what the methodology is, we can't really say we're comparing apples to apples.
Right.
And I think that's important. I think it's really important that we get two agencies coming up with comparable numbers. Because people, I think, are tired of taking their paddle to a tournament and trying to remember what it's sanctioned by. Can they play with a UPA-A only at this tournament or USAP only at this tournament? And, is it going to fail on-site testing at important tournaments based on spin or whatever, right? So I would love it if the two agencies right now, UPA-A and USAP, would become aligned on this.
Absolutely.
So I got a chart here, Clayton, showing kind of some popular paddles and what the RPM from my Canon looks like at 60 miles per hour. So you can see that the one that tops the charts is the Spartus P1, not the Nano Permagrip, but the original Permagrip. That at 60 miles an hour with my Canon got 2,400 RPM. Going down from that, we have the Level 624 Vapor Power 2, the Honolulu Blue Grit. By the way, all three of those, Tier 1 durability also. So not only do they start with some of the highest spin, they retain that spin the best. Add to that the 6.0 Coral Pro now. And then going down from there, we can look all the way down to the bottom, and we get things like, wait a second, Selkirk Omni gets low spin. I got 1550. So what in the world's going on there? So with my arm, I can get almost, I think, 2,300 RPM on average with the Omni. And Infinity gets great spin when it's new, for sure. So what's going on that it's, 800 less than some of the top spinning paddles? Well, what the Canon is great at is controlling everything with consistent variables. What it's not great at is necessarily getting what the potential spin, maximum spin for each paddle is going to be, because it's going to depend on the friction of the surface, and that friction is going to determine the ball slip, and what you can do to correct the ball slip is increase the angle. So what does 30 degrees, what does a 30-degree angle look like? We're shooting a ball at the paddle. This is 90 degrees, and this is 30 degrees, okay? So to go up from here at 45 degrees, to go down from there, we're getting like 20 degrees. And the reason why I landed on 30 degrees, same reason why UPA-A landed on 30 degrees, and I assume why USAP did it, is 30 degrees is where the top spinning paddles get the most spin.
Right.
And what's going on there is that at 30 degrees, it's an acute angle, so it's going to spin more, but also it's where the paddles with the most friction don't allow ball slippage. You get dipped down below 30 degrees, you start getting ball slippage, even with the grittiest or the most friction-based paddles.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like the Spartus P1, at 20 degrees is going to get far less than 2,400 RPM. But what that's not accounting for is that paddles that you can get with your arm, really good spin, like the Selkirk Omni, clearly it doesn't have quite as much friction on the surface. So what I'm doing when I'm doing topspin serves and drives is unconsciously optimizing the angle of the paddle, right? It's not that I'm like, oh, I need to adjust that from 30 to 34 degrees, but I'm finding that, because I know good spin when I see it, and I'm just naturally doing that with your arm. So it probably is the case that the Selkirk Omni performs best at greater than 30 degrees, because we're clearly getting some slippage.
Yep.
So to do that, to compare paddles to each other and get their maximum output of spin, we would need to manipulate the angle of the clamp for each individual paddle, and that's just the amount of work that would require is astronomical. So what this is good at, and by the way, this is why I haven't switched over to the Canon for my RPM measurements for each paddle. I'm still using my arm and the radar gun because that's more accurate for real world play. What the Canon is amazing at is capping spin, and for my purposes, doing the spin retention durability studies. Because other things being equal, even if you start with a lower spin for the Selkirk Omni, you're going to be able to calculate how much spin loss there is based on that baseline at 30 degrees, even though there's some slippage, because it's going to slip more after some of that grit goes down and is removed, and you're getting fewer RPM. So the other side of this is you might be saying, wait a second, if we're capping spin at 2,100, and there are these paddles like the Selkirk Omni that you can get 2,300 with your arm, but are scoring super, super low, then doesn't that invalidate the test? And I would say actually no, because it's not like if you change the angle of the paddle for the Selkirk Omni, somehow you're going to find this magic angle, let's say 32 degrees, and the Selkirk Omni is going to jump up to 2,800 RPM.
Right.
No, it's never going to go up above like the spinniest paddles, the 2,400s, the 2,300s. So Mike, you're going to close that gap again a bit, but it only makes sense not to increase the angle and cause the spinniest paddles to decrease the spin, but to keep the angle at 30 degrees where the spinniest paddles get the most spin, and then everything else that falls below it is clearly going to be legal. It's not going to exceed that even at the correct angle for that paddle. We're going deep today, Braydon. We're going super deep. All right, any other ideas on that?
Yeah, no, I think that checks out. I think, some people are curious what does that spin limit look like, or what does the corresponding grit look like? But, we have UPA paddles out there approved, like from 11.624, like from Honolulu. So all you need to do is go feel the face of that and know that they already passed a 2100 RPM limit. One other interesting thing to point out there is, with looking at that Spartus P1 at the top of your RPM chart there, it hasn't passed a spin test. No. And we don't know if it would pass a spin test, but it doesn't matter because it was approved before October 1st. So even with USAP changing, they don't need to recertify.
Oh, I forgot about that.
As long as it's that same paddle. Yeah.
I wonder if that's for a limited time or
I mean, it could be like the PB core limit and they could just move it arbitrarily.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up. Let's look at this chart and then do the math because like I said, I did the average difference between 60 mile an hour inbound and 40 mile an hour inbound. It's 360 RPM. So looking at these, the Spartus P1 is right on that boundary. If you subtract 360, what does that bring it down to? Like just over 2100, right?
Right.
So it could potentially fail the direct spin test at UPA-A and USAP. And then the other two, so we know that the Vapor Power 2, Hex Grit, and the Blue Grit are both UPA approved. And that makes sense. It's right at the top of that limit because I got around 2300 for the Power 2 and 2237 for the Blue Grit. Subtract 360 from that, and that brings it around the 2000 mark. So it's edging up close to that 2100 mark, but it's not quite there. So it's all kind of making sense, right? That's all kind of fitting into how we think it should be.
Yeah, and I mean, if needed, I'm sure Josh could tune Permagrit to get it under that if he needed to. So
for sure.
Not a huge problem.
All right. Should we jump into Q&A?
Let's do it.
All right. If you want to read.
All right, from RTJ-PB, we have, great work. How did the P1, 11.6, VP2, and J2CR Crystal Blue perform on the UPA-A or USAP spin test? Given it's a Canon rather than ARM test, still hoping the elite tier spin paddles of today aren't outlawed tomorrow. So I guess I kind of just answered that.
Yeah, we just covered that in a lot of detail, but it's worth kind of summarizing. So according to the Canon, my Canon tests, the Blue Grit and the Hex Grit are right at that limit, close to that 2100 limit. I'm getting more because I'm shooting it faster. But I would expect if USAP is getting the same or similar results in the same ballpark as UPA-A, then it's conceivable that it should be expected those would pass USAP as well. We'll see if that's actually the case. Okay.
All right, next we have from WayneMan50. How would the 6.0 Coral Pro compare to the B&B Loco? I have 2 in the last 8 months and both have lost a grit. Great paddle with lousy grit retention.
Yeah. So the Bread and Butter Loco, I haven't actually tested that paddle specifically. Actually, I have. Chris Olson and I are doing this shared experiment. And I'm doing the pre-testing with my Canon. He sent me a bunch of paddles. I'm testing those with my Canon. I sent them back to him, and he was going to do 100 games and test before and after spin. But now his back is messed up. Yeah, so that's still on delay. But we will eventually have tier results for the Bread and Butter Loco. But it is standard raw carbon fiber, and almost certainly it falls into tier 4. So 20% spin loss or more using my accelerated wear. The 6.0 Coral Pro is tier 1. It basically lost almost nothing, 1% or so of spin. So the spin retention on the Coral Pro will be much, much improved over.
And how would you say the play characteristics compare?
Oh, is that what he's asking?
I think so.
Okay. So that's the obvious. So the play characteristics of the Coral Pro is going to be in that closer to the middle of the field chart. I'm putting it in the soft and dense quadrant, but really close to the middle. So the Bread and Butter Loco is up higher in that stiff and hollow quadrant. So the Loco, stiffer, hollower, and the Coral Pro, softer and denser.
Yeah, and we do know that Selkirk bought out B&B, so I've heard rumors, some sort of infinite grid on a Loco or variant of that. So that's another option. I'm sure
that'll happen. What are your thoughts on the field difference between those two? And the firepower. What do you think of the firepower difference between the Coral Pro and the Loco?
Yeah, I maybe hit the Coral Pro once. I don't think I'm qualified to say.
Yeah.
But
I'm putting him close in firepower.
Yeah.
I think most people are going to think that Coral Pro is much less firepower than a Loco. And I think it is lower firepower, but not by much.
Yeah. All right, next up from IDK-DO4DB. I asked AB via social media if JOOLA is planning to come out with a Gen 4 paddle. She mentioned no, and that most pros do not prefer all foam paddles. Curious to know your thoughts.
Anna Bright. I'd like to get her on the pod. I think that is an outdated idea. In fact, Chris and Isaac, Pickleball Studio, have been tracking the pros that are shifted over to full foam, and it's higher than a lot of people think. Late last year, a lot of people were like, if all the paddle reviewers are praising all these full foam paddles, then why aren't the pros playing with them? Well, the pros are locked into contracts with their companies, their sponsors, and it wasn't until fairly recently that full foam entered the pro market to be able to play brands like 11624. But we have Deco playing with the 11624 full foam Gen 4. We have Tama and several others, and I think verified with Chris that it's over 50% of the male players in the PPA right now are playing with full foam. It's a lesser percent, I think 30-something% for women. But regardless, it's more than most people think, and probably more than even Anna Bright realizes.
Yeah, I think you have to follow the brands. I mean, you can't look at, you have JOOLA sponsoring half the players and be like, well, there's no foam. There's no foam option. But if we look at Selkirk, another popular sponsor, I think everyone playing Selkirk's playing a boomstick now.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, from Bart1476, we have, you guys like MPP foam paddles, but how many pros use MPP? I think amateurs up to 5.0 players like the sound, etc., but high level over 5.0 and pro players like softer foam paddles with more feel because power is not a problem.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of issues here. I don't necessarily think MPP is softer, but it goes back to what we just talked about. How many pros are able to play with an MPP over an EPP foam paddle? Right, 11624 has their Power 2, which is MPP, and Deco picked it up. And I think as more pro players play with them, they're gonna like it. It's a preference, It's not necessarily better or worse than EPP, but it's just a feel preference. And I think it's gonna play out in the pro realm just like it's playing out in the amateur realm. Like there's no pro. Okay, I'll step back from that for 1 second. Pros are very dialed into their paddles they've been playing with for years. That's why we see Ben John playing with honeycomb polypropylene, and he still likes the feel of fiberglass. But it took him like 10 years to get off of fiberglass, right? So he's never going to change his shape, and he's very attached to that, the performance he's getting from his paddle, and because he knows it so well. He doesn't want to shift his paddle around. And that's a big shift in terms of feel and performance characteristics between a Gen 3 JOOLA and a Gen 4 full foam, right? Some other pros are more likely to be a little more adaptable, but pros in general, I'd say, are less likely to adopt newer technologies because they don't really have time to mess around with not being able to play to the top of their potential for a couple of weeks while they're dialing in a new paddle. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and they also, they have the luxury to hit a new paddle every week, right? They're not worried about durability like we are as consumers.
Yeah, exactly. But beyond that, I'd say that, MPP feels different to different people, and I wouldn't necessarily say that it's stiffer than other paddles.
Yeah, I think you can't generalize. You have different foam densities that makes a big difference in how the paddle plays.
Yeah, for sure.
Next up from Miko Crispino, 8846. Hi, John. I'm one of your viewers in the Philippines. I was surprised that there are other people in my country that watch you, but you're right. A lot of my country people play pickleball a lot, so the boom is probably still early here. I usually play in multiple clubs, depending on capacity, because slots disappear quickly here in my area. But big shout out to you and your content creator friend, Pickleball Studio. I watch both of your content a lot when I get a chance. So I guess not a question, but a shout out.
Yeah, I love it. Shout out to the Philippines. Like we talked about in the podcast last week. Philippines
was that the second highest percentage for you?
Yeah, a big chunk of my viewership.
That's awesome.
And the U.S. used to be 99% of my viewership, and now it's close to half. It's 56% or something like that. Got a really nice email from another international person. So Stephen Aroki, the title of his email is The Rise and Fall of Pickleball by Michael Girdley, My Malaysian Perspective. So he's talking about this article, the video actually we talked about last week from Michael Girdley saying pickleball is doomed. So he says, Stephen says, John, I'm an avid follower of your channel and wanted to share some perspective from Malaysia, which I think also applies to Vietnam. Pickleball has exploded over the past 2 to 3 years. Court construction boomed, with players ranging from their 20s into their 70s. all indoor. It's too hot and humid, apparently, in Malaysia to play outside. He said he'd estimate the participation grew by more than 50% year over year during that 2 to 3 year period. He says, however, since around March, they started seeing signs of oversupply. So too many courts have been built, and some operators are already shutting down or trying to sell because of poor locations or lower quality facilities or unrealistic business expectations. He says a year ago, courts were fully booked, and today, however, many of the popular facilities still have open court time. He still believes pickleball will continue growing, but at a more sustainable pace, perhaps 10 to 20% annually over the next few years instead of the explosive growth we've seen recently. He also ties us into Vietnam, which he thinks appears to be following a similar path, although the sport is even more popular in Vietnam. And the Philippines, he also brings up, may be a preview of what comes next since the boom started earlier there. He said, thought I'd share this perspective. Thank you for everything you do. Channels help me learn the game and make better paddle buying decisions. Love hearing perspectives and insights from our international viewership. So yeah, it's not all roses in Asia. It's not the explosive growth will not continue forever as we expect with the maturing market. And I may have been a little naive in my interpretation of like going to Hong Kong and China and seeing kind of the growth there. It was like, wow, it's going to continue growing like this forever. Well, it's not. It is slowing down. And one of the most fragile parts of the whole pickleball ecosphere, I think, are the pickleball facilities because the model of a gym membership just doesn't quite fit fluid into a pickleball space because gym memberships are bought and they're not used, and everybody who buys a pickleball facility membership is using that thing. And they're going to narrow profit margins. You have to keep the courts full, and it's just hard to do even in Malaysia where it's hot and humid.
Yeah. I think it's like any investment portfolio, right? You make a bunch of investments and some pay off. People invested in pickleball facilities, some are going to pay off, but overall you're going to have that correction.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for those insights, and I'd love to hear from other people. Vietnam next, please.
All right, next from Matt Bell Pickleball. This is further complicated by companies calling these paddles Tenon, Coral, Coral Pro, Selkirk Omni, All Court. So referring to those paddles as all-court paddles, when the power and pop outputs are definitely not in that range. Yes, they may feel softer on ball contact, but they are still packing quite a punch. Thanks for talking about this, John.
Yeah, so he's talking about last week's podcast when we talked about whether or not the feel of a paddle influences our perception of its firepower. And I think we can conclusively say that the softer a paddle and denser a paddle feels, the less likely we're going to associate that with the power paddle, even though we're at the point now with full foam paddles where we are breaking that threshold into the power paddle category for any feel profile on the feel wheel, including the soft and dense profile. So good points.
All right, next from CK3. Which would you say has more control, Quanta or Tenon? I love the Quanta R2, and if you get that level of power but with even more control, despite the sound difference, then I would be open to an equally powerful, more forgiving paddle. Wouldn't we all?
Yeah. Have you hit much with the Tenon?
No, not at all.
Okay. Yeah, they're different feel profiles, and as we figured out last week, they're actually pretty equal in terms of firepower. I'd put the Quanta definitely more poppy than the Tenon. The Tenon has a lot of juice when you wind up with a full swing, but it also just feels a little softer. And what we didn't talk about last week, I don't think, is your perception of the field profile and your perception of the control actually matters. Like even if it's all placebo, if you perceive the paddle to be more control oriented, you're playing with it looser, you're trusting in that paddle more than you are one you're fearing you're going to pop up the ball. If you're playing from a fear mindset, you're not going to play as well as the confident mindset. So even if it's just all placebo, I would say that you find a paddle that you feel like has more control, and it'll happen. You will have more control because you'll be more confident with this. So overall, I think most people are going to find the Tenon to be an easier paddle to control, even though the firepower overall is similar to or the same as the Quanta. But it is more balanced to power over pop versus the Quanta, which is poppier.
All right. From Jeff Wirtz, 8108, we have, I noticed other paddle review podcasts or channels seem to be taking a lot of cues from your work on your website, or even just concepts that you are putting forth, like the Fill Matrix. And I know you all support each other and you're a genuinely nice guy, or seem to be. But at what point does your work become your intellectual property and other reviewers should not be copying all your concepts and revising their websites to include information that your review site and or podcast first reports? On one hand, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and clearly you want your insights to influence everyone's understanding of paddles when that's helpful. But on the other hand, at what point are you concerned with protecting your brand, and how do you navigate or walk this line?
Yeah. I kind of see this as a spin-off of our JOOLA patent discussion. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like it doesn't make sense for me or anybody else who's creating in this space to be like, nobody else can use my ideas. They're firewalled from everybody else. Because, look, I think we're still in a very healthy spot in the paddle review space. Probably, I can't think of another review space that's as healthy as the paddle review space.
Absolutely.
For some reason. I don't know exactly why. I'll attribute a lot of that to Chris Olson. He set the culture of the paddle reviewer, and he did such a good job with that. I'm so happy that I've found this, and I've been able to, provide some utility to people looking for paddles, and I love the creative side of this, and I've introduced some things, but I don't think that I don't want other people not to use those things. Do you know what I mean? And all ships rise with the tide, right? So we're all kind of feeding off each other, and we're seeing like I borrowed stuff when I first started also from Braydon and Will and Chris, that swing weight, twist weight. I didn't know anything about that. And I got a graffiti machine and started doing that myself. And then that led to like power and pop, which I brought into it. And that led to like the firepower metric, combining firepower and pop, which Braydon then iterated on. So we're all kind of, forcing each other to be better and not firewalling our ideas from each other. I think where would it cross the line? Where does it become sort of intellectual property that I need to protect? I mean, clearly I don't want people like scraping my website and presenting that data as their own,
right.
Like the Q-Core curve stuff. Like that's mine, If other people want to get a Canon and do that, great. But don't like use my data that I've spent many hours collecting and pretend like it's yours,
Absolutely.
So that's probably the line that can't be crossed,
Better to grow the pie, right, than to increase your share of the pie. Bring it, like you said, bring everyone up.
Exactly.
All right, so I have a final question from me. Now that you've talked about the grit level, the tier for the Spitfire, I know Braydon was early on the first to kind of come out and say it was tier 1, so how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, and this is a good dovetail from our discussion just now about like each of us brings our own thing to the table, and we're all kind of feeding off each other and improving the paddle review space. I think it's great that Braydon is testing something in a different way than I am, because we need more than the ball cannon test. So Braydon has an abrasion test. That's very similar to the Tabor abrasion. And he's got a mechanized device with a piece of sandpaper on it that rotates overnight on the paddle face, and he measures the microscopic RZ and RT surface texture before and after that. And that is an abrasion test. What I'm doing is a impact test. It's a ball impacting the paddle face over and over again. Is one necessarily better than another? No, they're just providing different lines of evidence that together it makes a more nuanced view of a paddle's spin retention. So apparently the Spartus Nano Permagrit has higher abrasion resistance than it does impact resistance. Now, both of those come into play in real-world play, right? So I'm not saying that the Canon is exactly the same as taking a paddle out on the court and playing with it for 3 months or X amount of games, right? But it's a close proxy. So is the abrasion test. So what happens when we play on the court is both of those things. You get impact wear on a paddle because the ball is impacting the paddle, but the ball is also picking up debris from the court that I'm not getting here in the laboratory, which is abrasion, right? So both of those come in together into play on the court. So eventually we'll just have to see what the marketplace tells us after the paddle's been on the market, or Chris and others are actually doing the number of games and measuring the spin before and after.
Right. Funny enough, I think Josh would be happier with your results. He doesn't want to cannibalize the P1.
Yeah, that's true. So a budget paddle that has the same spin retention as their premier paddle probably wouldn't be the best business model. So there we go.
Awesome. Well, any closing thoughts or stories, anything like that you want to share?
No, I think I'm good. You got anything?
No, I think that was awesome.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Clayton. Always fun to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Look forward to seeing you on the court again.